So we're looking at sourdough starter, and we have one here which is 4 years old. There's essentially two things that are happening in here. One is bacteria, which is creating that lovely sour flavour, and the other one is the yeast or a fungus to aerate the bread. So as well as starter, it's also known as a mother or a leaven, and you can use this both for bread and also for pizza. So let's have a quick look inside. What you're looking for is volume, and you're looking for it to be lovely and frothy, not just bubbles, because the bubbles are actually the bacteria, so you're looking for a good frothy consistency. It's what we call 100% hydration, so you create this by feeding it with equal quantities of flour and water, so it's 100% hydration. The way to start this process is, if you can, get hold of a starter which has been fermented for a number of years. That will give you a lovely flavour from the offset. But if not, you can feed this yourself and grow this yourself. So it takes about 7 to 10 days to get this to work. And the feeding process is literally just feeding it with equal quantities. So we've got 50 grams here of flour and 50 grams of water. Ideally, you want organic flour and bottled water, which has less chlorine. That will give you a slightly better performance. And just mix it through fairly roughly. So the idea is that the flour is giving the yeast some food to multiply and produce gas, and this will help you to leaven the bread. So you can feed it once or twice a day for 7 to 10 days, but the ultimate test actually is if it floats in water. So just take a small amount, and if it suspends in water, then you're ready to make bread. So it's time now to use this starter to make a sourdough, and we're going to make a pizza. So we're going to slightly simplify the method of sourdough bread to make our pizza. The first thing you need to do, having ascertained that your starter is ready to make bread, the yeast has developed enough. The first thing you want to do is to just combine your water with your strong flour. So we're working on a 65% hydration here. So that takes into account the amount of water and also the amount of water in the starter as well. But before you add the starter, we're going to do something called autolyse, which is to literally just roughly combine flour and water together and then leave it unkneaded for about 45 minutes. And this technique is really beneficial actually to develop the crust of the bread. Okay, so it's really straightforward. Combine them together until you've got a fairly rough dough. Cover it over and leave it for 45 minutes before you add the starter and the salt. So just work it through. Just scrape down the edges of the bowl. Just make sure it's all in one place. And then cover and leave for 45 minutes. Okay, so for the sourdough pizza, we're going to make a jalapeno pesto, which is a really lovely medium spiced or medium hot topping. So in place of the tomato sauce, we're going to put a pesto down on the base itself. So what's important to remember with a pesto is actually we are still using basil, but also jalapenos as well. It's important to blanch this, so plunging into boiling water and then refreshing in iced water. So what this does actually is it sets the chlorophyll in the leaf and gives you a very, very vibrant green colour to the pesto. It's also going to extend the shelf life of this as well, because it kills any bacteria in the pesto. So very quick process, straight into boiling water, just for say 10 seconds. It's obviously possible to cook this until you lose the colour, but if you cook it briefly, it sets the chlorophyll. So that's fine, so straight out. And we're using the stalks here as well. There's lots of flavour in the stalk. So just cool it down. And then obviously wring out the excess moisture. And then very straightforward, just combine all of the ingredients together. So we've got jalapeno peppers, just slices of jalapeno, a nice piece of garlic, some salt, and also some pine nuts. Essentially, you can be creative with the nuts that you use. And you can also swap out the basil for things like rocket or watercress. So blitz it to a smooth paste. And we're going to add just a little bit of oil to this as well. So don't be afraid to really blend this to bring out the colour of the basil. Nice and smooth. This recipe gives you a thick pesto, which mimics the consistency of the tomato sauce. But actually what you can do is you can add extra oil and then strain the pesto through a piece of kitchen paper to remove the oil from the green part of the pesto, so you get a thick mulch and then you get an oil as well, so you can extract a lovely pesto oil from this as well. But as I say, this recipe just gives you a nice thick consistency to mimic the tomato sauce for the pizza. So we're back to the sourdough pizza. So it's had an opportunity to autolyse, so this is improving the crust, and it's time now to add the starter. So we've got our 75 grams here, and also some salt. And then we're going to need this for, it's a slightly shortened recipe, so we're going to need it for an extended amount of time just to really develop the gluten, which is really important with a pizza, to have that elasticity. So it's a bit of a messy process. We're not going to use any flour. We're just going to pull the edge of the dough into the centre. So at the moment it's quite a rough dough. Want it to be nice and smooth. So we've ended up with about 65 to 67% hydration here. So compared to a normal sourdough, this is a little bit more dry. Okay, but it's slightly easier to work with. So this is going to develop that gluten, give you a lovely elasticity, which is super important when you're stretching and pounding the pizza dough. And you want to do this for a good 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the efficiency of your technique. And you'll notice that it gets more elastic as you go through. Okay, so we're just finishing off the kneading of the sourdough. We've done most of it in the bowl. The dough's become really lovely and smooth and quite elastic. If you want to finish off just the final stages on the table, that's absolutely fine. Try not to use any flour. because you'll be adding lots of flour to the pizza dough later. And as I say, it should be nice and springy, really glutinous. And if you can, one of the tests you want to do with this is the window pane test. So just open out the dough and you should be able to effectively see through the dough. It should be glutinous enough for you to be able to see through, you know, a layer or two of the dough, which indicates that it's very, very elastic. So just open it up. Okay, so you can see, just starting to see through the dough, so it's nice and elastic. We'd probably go a little bit further if it was a sourdough bread, but for a pizza, this is absolutely fine. So we're going to start the bulk rise. So into a bowl, cover with cling film, and allow this to prove until it doubles in size. If it was a sourdough bread, we'd be looking at 4 to 6 hours. For a pizza dough, you can do it much more quickly. So about an hour or so, and then we can start to shape. So we're back to the sourdough recipe. This is risen by twice, and we've got some nice little bubbles underneath. So it's time now to shape the dough shells, so the discs, to then rest and then be later pounded and stretched for the pizza. So you want to just knock this back onto the table. It's a lovely, soft and light dough. And we're going to cut this into 4. Use our knife. So this will make 4 medium-sized pizza. And what we'll do, put a little bit of flour down on our paper. So we've just got a tray here lined with parchment paper. A little bit of flour. So the idea here is that we're allowing the dough to prove again, but in a disc, so that a nice tight disc. So it's going to prove up. And it's also going to relax during that proving, allowing us to shape it into a nice thin pizza. So this process here is to create the shape, the nice round shape. Onto there. So we're just pulling from the edge into the center. Pinching all of those edges together. And just give them plenty of space to prove. And you want to come back to this no less than 1 hour. You could even leave this for 4 to 5 hours. So you can do this well in advance. But at least an hour, because essentially the gluten has to be completely soft in order for you to get a nice thin base, to stretch it to a thin base. Okay, so here are our pizza shells ready. So a little bit of flour on top. And then also cover them over, okay, so they don't dry. Put 2 on. There we go, pizza shells. So we're back to the pizza. We've got our sourdough pizza shells here. So they've proved nicely. We're going to start to pound and shape them, or pound and stretch them. So some flour down on the table. Just lift them up carefully. You want to retain as much of the air in there as possible. Okay, so down on the table. And you can use plenty of flour at this stage, okay? So the pounding technique is really just to create that lovely shape and crust. So don't worry so much about the center, just work around to the edge. Now, for me, I like it really thin, both the base and also the crust. So just work the dough to the edge. So this is known as pounding. There's another technique where you can just push it and stretch it down. So the dough is lovely and soft. All the gluten is completely relaxed at this stage because they've been resting for about 2 hours. Okay, so once you've got the crust that you want, you can start to just throw it onto each hand, just to start to stretch the dough. Another technique would be to just allow it to drop and turn it like this. And then with floured hands, if you want to, actually with fists, you can just start to stretch the dough on top of your hand. And as you get more confident, you can just throw it up to stretch it. So we're starting to get a bigger shape. So you can be quite vigorous with it. And it's really worth just sort of being patient with it, making sure that you get that nice thin base. Okay, so if you don't have a pizza stone or a pizza peel, just use some parchment paper, semolina down on the paper itself, a little bit of flour too, and then the pizza on the top. So this is a medium-sized pizza. Just make sure you're happy with the shape. And then we have the jalapeno pesto. And then some mozzarella. So again, nice small pieces. Less is more with pizzas. And the oven for this is preheated as hot as it can go. So 250 or 260. Preheated for at least half an hour. We want this to cook and slightly scorch when it cooks. Okay, and the last thing to add is some pecorino, just over the top. Okay, and we take it straight to the oven. Just pull in some of the flour. So we're going to pull the paper onto the tray. So pizza in the oven, really, really hot, 250 to 260, just for 10 minutes. So we have our cooked sourdough pizza here, straight from the oven. And what we're looking for actually is a really light and thin base. some definite scorching from the oven, so that it's really dried out. We've got a little bit of extra yogurt with some pecorino cheese just to counter some of the heat of the jalapeno pesto. And we've got some extra basil on top, so it's looking really delicious, mouth-watering stuff. So we have a little taste. And actually, as well as being dry on the base, you can see underneath, it's actually still nice and soft to eat. And the cream cheese with the jalapeno works really nicely. The crust is pretty thin, which is great, and it's dried through. You can see it's completely cooked. Really delicious. So not just with this, but you can do this with variations of this, but the key is to keep it really, really light in terms of toppings, and cook it quickly in a very hot and preheated oven. Sourdough pizza.